scene.
We're live! Hi, Tahira. I'm so glad you could make it with us in your car today.
Yes. Hello from my second home.
So I want to say hello to anyone watching the video afterwards, or anyone who may be live with us, and give a little context for this conversation. And Tahira, I want you to introduce yourself and say a little bit about who you are and how we came to this conversation. But Tahira reached out to me by email in response to some of my emails on my list, and I realized that we could have a really fascinating conversation. And I thought, why keep that conversation between the two of us? Why not just have it live and share it with others? And so we're kind of doing a risky, vulnerable, but fun thing, which is like, we don't know each other at all, and we're going to have, hopefully, a similar kind of conversation together that we would have if we just met on Zoom to meet each other. So I'm just so thrilled that you were really willing to go on the adventure with me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This will be fun.
Yeah, so maybe to catch everybody else up to speed, can you say a little bit about what prompted you to reach out to me?
So I'm on your email list, and you sent out an email about a talk. You did an interview, and I'm not remembering exactly who it was with, but it was about culturally relevant pedagogy, and how you were basically interviewing the author of, I can't think of her book either. But it was but that was what caught my eye, and I tuned in for the interview, and I was like, let me reach out to Gretchen, because we're coaches. We coach in different ways, but yes, in all lanes, there it is. So I watched that interview you did, and was it Dr. Fletcher?
Yes, Dr. Fletcher, Terrence Fletcher.
Yes, and so I was excited, because here you are, an academic coach, thinking about equity in education, thinking about equity in coaching. And I felt the same way. And I'm a life coach. I work with teens as well. And I also am thinking about, okay, what can I do to make my practice as a life coach more equitable? And then I also wear an educator hat. And so educational equity is a passion of mine as well. And so I'm in this space where I'm kind of figuring out, what is my role in doing this? And so I just wanted to reach out to you, because I was really impressed that was what you were also exploring with your audience.
Yeah, and I'm so excited about that, because there aren't a lot of us yet who are in this middle space. There are more and more people talking about educational equity in schools, and it's wonderful and so needed and so overdue and all of that. It's not even overdue, because it's been a conversation that's been had that we just can't seem to make some shifts around because of how steeped white supremacist culture is in our greater culture and in our schools, I think. But so that conversation's been had, but then there's us. And you're a little different flavor of what I'm doing, but similar, where we're working outside of schools, but with kiddos who are so affected by schools because that's a phase of life they're in. And I feel like there's not really a body of work yet that help us know how to approach issues related to equity. Both those of us who are white, and that's myself, who are sort of growing our ability to even see systemic racism, and then also for folks of color who are doing this work as well. So I was so excited that you wanted to have this conversation, because it's a real exploratory place for me, and I'm hoping to find collaborators to help build this body of work around how we think about educational equity in the coaching and after school or supplementary to school field.
Yes.
So yay!
Here we are, finally.
So if we were having this conversation privately, I would just ask you, what is your story? How did you go from educator to life coach? So will you tell us that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I started teaching right out of college. So I graduated, started in the classroom. However, I had no background in education. My undergrad degree was biology. So it was a critical needs subject, and they let me come in and teach people's children based on what I knew. And so I struggled a little bit as a younger teacher, and eventually found my way. I did eventually get my degree in education as well. But what I loved the most about teaching was my relationships with students and the ability to be that sounding board, that mentor for them. And so when my husband and I got married, we started our family. That's when I left the teaching profession and we started a nonprofit. And so in that nonprofit, we had a program called Helping Young People Excel. And at the time, I didn't really know anything about life coaching at all. But I knew that I wanted to work with teenagers. I knew that I wanted to help them learn all of the things that they needed to learn outside of what they were getting in school, right? Because when they came to me with their issues, their, struggles going on, whether it was in school or not, that was where I just really felt a desire to connect with them and support them. And so I looked for ways to do that. And I specifically remember thinking, okay, how can I reach the quieter students that are not talking to me all the time? And so I discovered life coaching on a Google search as a tool to bring to our nonprofit to serve the youth that were in our programs. And after going through that training, that's when I said, oh, there's a name for this thing I'm doing not so well, but doing right, trying to do. And it's life coaching. And I specifically did a program that taught me and certified me as a life coach for teen girls. And so at that point, I came back home, launched my practice, and, fast forward 10 years, here we are.
I love that. Fast forward 10 years, because I've been doing this work for a little over 10 years, but basically 10 years. So yay us for being at the stage of our professions where something has been, it's either, what's a good analogy? It's either well cooked or it's well marinated or it's something, and we're at that place in our expertise where it's the unconscious competence.
Ooh,
that hierarchy. Like we can do it and we can be really good at what we do without having to think about it much.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Which then frees up this next layer of conversation, because then it's like, what do we really want to be doing in the world? How can we be using our tools and our expertise to really make a difference in ways that feel meaningful?
And that's exactly where I am now, because I still love coaching. I love working with my clients. I love running group programs for girls, doing workshops. I love all of it. But there's this side of who I am that's an educator. Mm-hmm. And I consider myself, as a lot of educators, even outside of the classroom, maybe you do too, but I really do consider myself a forever educator. It's just
for sure.
Me, right? Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I did end up going back to school. I just finished actually in an education leadership program, and I was still searching, like, how do I marry this love of coaching with my, passion for education? And I'm still figuring some of that out. But what I'm realizing is that the skill set that we as coaches can really help some of the challenges that we're seeing in schools and in our work in our private practices as well.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting to me to hear you say, because I actually just recently hired, and I'm in the midst of working with a strategy consultant to help me kind of, the last 10 years have been like an explosion of my own creativity and being the forever educator that I am. Like, what do I want to be teaching? And so I've created this huge suite, and now it's a little too big and unwieldy. And so how do we kind of bring it together? But one of the tricks, and one of the things I'm kind of stubborn about, is that I really like serving students and families, and I really like serving the larger community of educators, but then there's the smaller community of academic coaches. And, a lot of marketing wisdom tells you to pick your niche. And I'm like, what? But the important thing is for everybody to be having conversations together and to be with humility, building our tools and sharing our tools together and practicing our tools. And so I'm resistant to choose. And so it's exciting to me to say that it sounds like you're in a similar dilemma around how do we not niche down, but how do we actually broaden to serve everyone?
Absolutely. I think that when I was really pondering with this, because niche down, right? That's what we're taught. But I was thinking, okay, when I look at who I'm here to serve, who I'm called to serve, at the end of the day, it's teenagers, it's our youth, right? And so when you think about all of the people who impact them, how do you leave educators and coaches out of that conversation? So if the goal is to reach them, it's almost like we have this desire to also reach those who also reach them. And so I see that in you with your academic coaching programs for other aspiring academic coaches.
By the way, side note, we'll come back to this theme, but I just, like, how did you end up landing on my list? Like, what was it about my work that appealed to you enough to sign up for it?
So I have 4 boys, my own children, and I have tutored in the past, but as a tutor, you don't necessarily have like a toolkit, right? And so tutoring your own kids is a little different. And so when I saw, I don't know what, I wish I could tell you exactly what got me there, but I use your content for my own kids at home, just as their tutor slash teacher slash mom. And I've actually referred clients to your content as well who need that academic support.
Oh, great. It's so interesting because I'm like listening to you through the lens of my work with my strategy consultant right now. And so it's fascinating to be like, yep, there are parents who come through the tools, but parents who also use the tools in their work or could potentially either use or refer them in their work. It's so interesting. Yeah. And so in your leadership program, how fascinating that you went back to school to do that. So was that a master's or was that
That was a master's. That was a master's in educational leadership. One of my strengths is learner. I love to learn. I would go to school forever if I could get paid to do it.
You and everybody else attracted to my work, and me too, right? I want to just name, Christine is my assistant who's behind the scenes and who put the phrase Forever Educator up there. So maybe you need to put up the phrase Forever Learner because
it's so true. It's so true. And I always feel like there's something more I need to learn. There's something I'm missing. And I don't know that I'm ever going to start a school, but like I really have this desire to be a part of the most amazing school in the world. Who knows what it'll be, when it'll be. So that's where that's where my interest in educational leadership came from. Like, how do we do school in a better way?
I hear you. And there's a spectrum for me too. There's how do we do school in a better way? But I've also, let's see if I can. Yep, there it is. I've been reading this book recently about unschooling. And so I'm really fascinated in what does it mean to do school the way the kid in question needs school. And there are a wide variety of students who would really thrive in an unschooling capacity and families who would thrive in an unschooling capacity. And it's historically seem to be largely white folks who do the unschooling thing, but that's what's been so interesting and exciting to me to read about what's this author, Akilah Richards, and her work. So I highly recommend it. Are you taking notes?
I'm taking, I'm like typing the name of that. I just really, after the pandemic hit, I did take my kids out of school. And so I'm a homeschooling mom this year. Yes, we were in different schools and schedules were crazy and I didn't know how we were going to do it. And I said, you know what, let me just put my degree to work at home. Yeah. And so I didn't even know unschooling was a thing until I started researching homeschooling ideas and what I can do when I, just threw myself blindly into that task of homeschooling my boys. And so it's fascinating because part of what we've been able to do, I mean, granted, we haven't been able to do a whole lot of travel, but there was so much more flexibility. We could learn at the park. We were planning a trip on an RV for 2 weeks. Like there's so in a classroom. So I'd be curious to learn more about it as well.
Yeah, well, I was do
this.
And I'm fascinated to think about the spectrum of what schooling can be and or what learning can be, and how do we equip ourselves with tools that help, and us being the adults working with students, whether that's parents or whether that's educators, to be able to direct students to the right kind of schooling and learning for them, and not just assume that there's only one way that it should be done.
That would be a great, I'm thinking, like, how do you make that decision as a parent? I think we just send our kids to school without considering other alternatives until there's a problem, or we just know that we're going to homeschool. I'm thinking of moms who've been homeschooling from day one. And so to think that, what if there were a way to make that decision in a way where you're putting your child in the best possible scenario for them? I think that would be amazing. I wish I had that answer.
Right. And there are so many things that go into that question too, because there are certain layers of privilege that go into even being able to have the awareness to ask that, whether it's, I'm thinking specifically right now, class privilege, or the combination of class and race. Anyway, it's just it's interesting.
You're absolutely right, because when you think about, okay, what does this educational equity even look like? The whole idea is to be able to remove those barriers to, to success, or to the ability to thrive for students who are from more marginalized areas, or who may not have that same level of access. And so even considering, even recognizing, that I could stay home and homeschool my kids, right? Not everyone has that option. There were people working throughout the pandemic that had to be outside of their home. So there are so many layers to it. And then where do we look to for the people who are making those decisions? Like, who makes those decisions?
Right.
I don't know.
Right. A lot of different people make those decisions, and sometimes they're politicians, and sometimes they're, not the people that necessarily know and love our kiddos.
It's true. So I don't know. I just think that there's so many, maybe more questions than answers, but I think asking the right questions actually helps you understand there's another way. I have a dear friend who, I'm actually on the board of her school, and it's a micro school. And I didn't know, we have a few of those in Atlanta, but it's not, when I think back, my oldest son is 14. I didn't consider a micro school for him when it was time to sign up for the kindergarten tours. And I'm just like, to your point, that would have been an excellent setup for him.
Well, and for folks who are listening who have no idea, I've actually not heard that phrase before, so I'm asking for me, but then also for others, how would you identify what a micro school is?
I was telling my son about it. And this may not be the right definition, because I'm still learning and I'm still new to that community, but I think about it as like a one-room schoolhouse. There's one teacher and multiple students of different age levels, from elementary all the way through graduating seniors. And it's a small group. And what I really see as I'm getting to know them is that teacher knows her students. Those students know each other, and age all of a sudden is varied. So you've got older students, high schoolers, you've got elementary school students, and the way that they're able to interact. Like, I look at my 7-year-old, he doesn't interact with high school seniors every day. And so there's learning there, and there's opportunities for leadership among the students because of the difference in age, and just more flexibility in terms of allowing them to explore what they're naturally curious about.
Interesting. Yeah, because it sounds like it's got some flavors of homeschooling in it, but also perhaps some flavors of unschooling in it as well.
I think you're exactly right. And I haven't done much research on them, but I think they can determine what they want their approach to look like. Because I know this particular school that I know of is very heavy in a Montessori type approach.
Interesting. And also, just side note, because you mentioned Montessori, her podcast that has a different name that I can't think of right now, they just had a 3-episode series on Black people in Montessori, which I haven't listened to yet, but I was really intrigued by by that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah. So life coaching, I want to come back to that for a little bit, because are you still doing it under the under the auspices of your nonprofit, or are you outside, like self-employed outside of that context, or how is that? What's the structure of that for you?
Yeah, sure. So I am not doing coaching under the nonprofit. We actually don't have the nonprofit anymore. It's been about 5 years since we stopped our nonprofit programs, but I started my coaching practice just as its own entity. So I'm just doing that under the umbrella of Teen Girl Impact. That's my company, and everything falls under that.
Mm-hmm. And what's the structure of how you end up working? That now I've moved kind of from thinking, in my own business, I'm interested in the coaching, the working directly with students, but then also like business structures that those of us who work with kids in a coaching capacity have. And so do you have, do you tend to work over the course of 10 sessions with a student, or over the course of a year, or how do you work?
Everything in between. So I do like to start with the 10 sessions. So I start with a 3-month commitment from families so that I have that time to get to know them and build that routine, because in coaching, I'm really looking for that momentum. And so we meet every week in the beginning of that 3-month commitment. And some families, continue. My average family, I would say I work with their daughters for 6 months. That said, I've got some clients I've been working with for 2 years. I've got some that maybe just stay for 3 months. So it just depends. But that's how I've always structured the one-on-one piece. I always start with 3 months.
And one of the things that I have a story about in regards to life coaching that I'm happy to have you actually burst that story or poke holes in that story. How do I want to say this? So sometimes people come to me who have gotten either a life coaching or an academic life coaching certification, and they say, I can't sell my services. Parents don't really seem to want life coaching for their kids. And my answer to that, so this is my story, has been I think what parents really think they want is the academic toolbox. They think they want the grades fixed, and it's college they're worried about, so they want all of that fixed. So even though we know the life coaching skills are actually what students need for their well-being and their thriving, we lead with academic toolkit, and that is why the Art of Inspiring Students, the course that I teach for educators with my academic toolkit in it, is such a useful toolkit, is because you can then let parents know, you have this expertise, you have these tools that you're going to share with their students. So they will get to see some growth in that area. And there will also be this other life coaching area as well. So that's what I tell folks, build your academic toolbox and you will better be able to sell your services. But I don't know. How do you sell your services?
I'm happy to speak about that. That's interesting, because I definitely can say I see a population of parents, right? Very driven by, I have to get my kid into the right college, right? And academics are huge. I mean, I'm a teacher. Of course, I think academics are huge. And so I don't think I think that's a brilliant way to position your business. And I will say this, I probably would have had that story too, had I not become a life coach. And also had I not seen the evolution of my own coaching practice. So when I first started in my foundation, I still did life coaching. I never, ever said I'm a life coach. Ever. But I was using life coaching skills because I continued to take coaching courses and build my skills as a coach because it was important to me. But at the time, 10 plus, this was 2005 when we launched our foundation, and then 2010 when I became a life coach. So back then, and I'm in Atlanta, the only life coach that I think people were talking about was maybe Ayanla Van Zant. And so there wasn't this huge parent population knocking on my door, Googling my website and wanting a life coach for their girls. So a lot of my marketing was educating parents on the benefits of life coaching. Well, I can say now it's different because now coaching is so common. A lot of my parents have had life coaches, and what they're Googling now, instead of how can I help my teen daughter? Oh my gosh, what am I worrying about? Now what they're Googling is life coach for my daughter. Is there such thing as a teen life coach? So they've had experiences with life coaching very often, not always, but they're like, I want this for my daughter. And so I think now, and I will say over the last year, especially now coming out of this pandemic, mental health has been, right?
Yep.
So I mean, I had a lot of parents reaching out to me the last 18 months, and there's even in schools now recognizing, okay, the academic piece isn't going to be as effective, as impactful as it can be if we don't address what's going on with mental health. And so coaching comes into play sometimes there.
So what are some of the things that you, like, can you give us a peek into, like, maybe tell us a client story or the few, like, I'm just curious, like, what themes are you noticing? What are you working on? What growth have you seen in your clients since you've been working with them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's so interesting. Well, I'll come back to that. So
You want to say what you're going to come back to so I can help?
I was thinking about the identity piece. So I'll come back to that.
Yeah. Okay.
But because that's new in my own work in terms of equity and how I'm going to do this. But just to answer your question, there's shifts in what teens experience and what parents ask for. I will say maybe 5-6 years ago, I got a lot of calls about, I'm worried about the decisions she's making. Can you help me build her confidence? That's why I named my program Conquering Confidence, because confidence, confidence, confidence. That's what parents were saying to me, right? So kind of like how you did the academic coaching, that I led with confidence for a long time. And I had to learn that based on what parents were saying. It's shifted a little bit now. Now I get parents who are saying, she's not telling me anything. I need someone that she'll talk to. Anxiety, I mean, all the time. Anxiety is something that, she's more anxious due to COVID, or she's been in therapy for anxiety, or she's anxious about college and school and all the things, right? So things that my clients may be struggling with as it pertains to their confidence, it shows up in their homes as, she's making poor decisions. She's letting her friends take advantage of her. She's not making decisions that are in her own best interest. She's a people pleaser. She is putting so much stress on herself. This is another huge one, stress to perform, right? All A's, perfect GPA, get into college. There's a lot of stress that comes with that because, by the way, she's also captain of her cheerleading squad and she volunteers at church every Sunday, and she's just trying to do so much to get into college. So this pressure and stress, that's a huge theme in my practice. Communication barriers. So mom will say something like, she used to tell me everything and now she tells me nothing. I don't know who she is today. She loved me yesterday, but I think I'm her enemy today, and I don't know.
Oh, adolescent
stuff. Yes. So in some ways, it's the same, right, as that we did as teens too. But the emphasis is what I think shifts depending on what's going on in the world.
Yeah. So bring us back to the identity piece.
So the identity piece, as I've been exploring, like, what does it mean to coach with this lens, this equity lens? Like, I've been really exploring that. And so what does that mean for me as a coach when I show up to clients? Do they know, or do they need to know more of my identity? And then how does my identity, and when you think about it, identity, you're thinking about the beliefs, the values that you have, right? It all impacts what we do, who we follow, who we learn from, who we select as our coaches. And so I'm thinking about, okay, what made that parent select me? What made that parent not select me? And then am I showing up with that full identity? So if I have a parent who, and I have quite a few clients who have white moms and Black dads. And so they select me to work with their girls because they want that Black woman to help with some of the conversations. And so when I recognized that this was something I was seeing a lot, then it made me think, okay, well, am I showing up bringing my full experience as a Black woman? And the answer was no for a long time, because if you look at me, you may not know anything about who I am, who I'm from, these women, right? So how do I show up for clients? And so then I thought about that. Well, how does it impact my clients, right? Do they have these disembodied experiences in school where part of their identity stays home? do they and I'm exploring it with my own kids, like does my 14-year-old, he's not 15 yet, does my 14-year-old 6-foot son get to show up as his self when he's moving through the world, right? And then what fear comes to me as his mother when he does do that? So all of these pieces to identity, I think, are important in helping students unpack, but also as the person who they're engaging with, I have to be aware of it first, how it shows up for me.
Yeah.
Probably a longer answer than you
No,
want.
I love it. It's just making me so happy because I don't know that I've been talking about this on my list, so you may or may not know, although, of course, you saw my increasing emails about equity, but one of the things we've started doing I've started doing in my Anti-Boring Educators Club, which, this monthly subscription, is I started a book club in January, and I'll say that I don't know how many other people are actually reading the books besides me, but one of the things that I've just decided to do with my business is be supremely selfish with it and use my business as a structure to force me to do the things that I want to do anyway, and just assume that people in my world are attracted to my wacky brain and want to think, like, learn through the lens of my brain. So I was like, we're doing a book club. And the theme for the last 6 months has been identity. And we've been reading more of these. So we've been reading, this is the one right now, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. So that's this one. Let's see, what else? Do I have them easy access again? Sometimes I don't because I'm reading them. So I can't pull them when I want them. But the other one is Coaching for Equity.
Oh, that's a great one. Christina Aguilera. No, oh my gosh, not Christina
Aguilera. Elena Aguilar. Elena Aguilar. And then Cultivating Genius by Goldie Muhammad. That was our second book. And I didn't have us read the full books, but I pulled the pieces from the books that refer to identity. And one of the things I haven't finished doing, because the book club ends in June, but I've pulled, like, they all seem to have chapters with lists of, like, on identity, with lists of possible questions you can ask yourself to explore your own tenets of your identity, both the socio-political ones and the values ones. But then also I'm interested in, and which questions do we also ask of our clients, and what is the role of a two-way street in discussing identity in coaching? And also, what is the role of this as people who are self-employed, of naming our identity markers in our bios on our websites? To what extent do people do that, or don't they do that? And I have noticed I've joined the Rachel Rogers has a community, We Should All Be Millionaires, and she's a Black woman, and this is the only entrepreneurship space that I know of where race and gender and other oppressions are talked about overtly. And it has been fascinating for me to watch and read the bios, especially of the women of color in the group, and how identity markers for them and their businesses, like, are so tied together. Like, they're breaking out and being like, I'm being who I am in the world, both from the capacity of my passions and my intellect. That's what we're building our business around, but also through the lens of who I am. And so many of them name, like Rachel even names in her bio, like, I'm a Afro wearer, like, she's like a specific marker that refers to her race. And I've been interested in how white people don't necessarily do that. And what does it look like to be a white person who's looking at identity, both the parts of my identity that I'm proud of and the parts of my identity that I may not be proud of, namely whiteness. And to what degree does any of that belong in my bio on my website? And again, as you said earlier, there may be more questions than answers, but I find it fascinating to wrestle with. And I do think what you named is true, that parents are looking for people who can speak to their kids the way I've been saying it, most precious identities, to some degree. And so if we lead with that, with our identities as coaches, we make it easier for kids to find the people they need. And so, yeah, thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm like, what's in bio? How much of my identity is in bio? Not a whole lot. I mean, you could look at a picture and say, okay, she probably identifies as a Black woman. Mm-hmm. Would anyone know that there's Caribbean heritage? My mother's from Guyana. No one would know that. Do they need to, right? So those are the questions. And it's funny, I'm thinking about one of my clients I'm working with right now. She was telling me she's going out of town and she mentioned her Tia. If I look and just assume who she is, she's a Black girl, right? Well, when she started to talk and I asked her about her identity, right, I discovered that she's got Panamanian in her. Mm-hmm. But what if I, first of all, didn't know that Tia meant aunt in Spanish, or I just, there's so many pieces to this, because now I'm wondering, should I have known that before? How would it have helped me support her? Could it have? Could there have been a common experience that she and I have shared with another culture that makes up part of our identity that could benefit her? I don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think there's value in it. I'm even thinking of clients that I know are still exploring gender, sexuality. And I'm wondering if there was a coach that they could connect with that has been through some of those same experiences as a teen.
Yeah. Well, I love that you brought that up, because I don't know if you saw my video from last week on my newsletter, but I think the title was "We Need More Coaches with These Identities."
No, I didn't. I'll go back and look for it.
I held up a whiteboard. And so what I'm noticing is, and it was so funny to put there, it's like, we need more cisgendered men in coaching. And it's like, I'm an advocate of questioning the patriarchy, and we need more cisgendered. There are so many boys out there who could really use some mentorship from a loving, caring man who has wrestled with his own whatever he needs to wrestle with inside of himself, and can share that with young men who need that kind of mentoring. And so that was on the list. Queer identities were on the list. And I'm currently coaching a non-binary student. And on the one hand, I think I'm a wonderful coach for this person, because so many of my dearest relationships are queer identified. And so I can speak to that. And yet what is missing from my ability to truly deeply connect with this young person who doesn't need academics as much as they need somebody to really help them I talk through their gender dysphoria and their relationship with their parents and all the ways they feel they are being misgendered and missed by the people around them. And and then you go to my website, and my anti-boring approach trained coaches are all mostly cisgendered white women. And so it's like there's a mismatch here between the identities of the kids that are out there who need support and the folks who are coming into my program. And so that's one reason why I've been doing the work I've been doing over the last year. It's like, what needs to change inside of me to attract folks who actually will really be able to serve the beautiful array of identities of the kids who are actually out there.
I love that that's important to you. And I think about, okay, how do we do that as coaches? How do we make it clear to anyone, I'm a safe person for you to work with. You can be all of who you are in our conversation. Even educators, right? And so I think about, and I don't know what it would take per se for a parent to look at you or look at me and feel that way, and to trust that we would connect in the most healthy and appropriate ways with their teens. But what I think about, you don't know what you don't know, and I don't pretend to be an expert in every identity and everything going on with teenagers. But what I can do, and I think this is where the life coach training piece really comes into play, and really being a good coach, we approach sessions with this level of curiosity and a willingness you may not have answers for, because it's really about helping them discover those answers. And so to me, I think the best way to do that. And I'm wrestling with some of this too. So like, these are my thoughts as I'm figuring it out in my own practice, right? But there's a level of humility and a willingness to learn from my clients that I have to have in order to do that.
Yeah, and I love the word humility has now been brought up a few times, and I think too the humility also to say my intention is to be a safe space, and I know that I may not be a safe space for all your identities, and so either just saying let's help find you somebody who is a safe space for all your identities, or feel free to be clear with me where the boundaries are around this part of my identity is one that it doesn't feel like you understand, and I need to protect that. So let's not talk about that area of my identity, please.
That is so good, though. Like, I'm really thinking about what you said. Like, am I a safe space for all of my clients and all of their identities? Gosh, I hope so, but I can't say 100%, with 100% certainty that I am. And do they feel comfortable enough to say to me what you just said, right? I don't feel comfortable with bringing this side of myself to you. So I think that's a responsibility that I need to take on as a coach. And I do say to parents, I'm thinking of like all my discovery calls. What I always say is, if I can't connect with your daughter, we'll find her someone who can. I have an amazing network of coaches for girls. But I have to really mean that with all that these clients bring to the table. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah. Well, and case in point, inside my community, there is a white coach who just brought a concern, or not a concern, but like a dilemma to her, where one of her students, who is a Black student who goes to a mostly white independent school, is really not appreciating being in that environment. But the student's mother, and she wants to go to the public school, but the student's mother, so a Black woman, is, and likely there's, a combination of race and class issues here, is not feeling good about who she sees at that public school, and really wants her daughter to have the academic rigor of the space. And so she and I, this coach is a white coach, and we were talking about how to navigate, like, what is the most respectful way to navigate the situation? And clearly the family really trusts her to be able to be talking to her at this level. And one of the areas that she got to, she's like, maybe I'm going to just name that maybe we should find a different coach who actually can more identify and more support her and actually help balance the lack of representation at the school, so that she has someone she can refer to. And I'm so thrilled that my community has been building more and more diverse representation. So we actually have some folks that you could refer her to now. And maybe the family won't choose it because they've built a strong relationship, but at least to know that they can have the opportunity to choose that, if that's the most precious identity that needs protecting and needs support right now.
And how incredible it is that you're willing to say that to that family, or not even just say it, but recognize it first. So I think you have an amazing coach, for one, that is doing this work with that family, that they've even been able to express that, because I can relate to those concerns as a parent.
Yeah, and real. To both of those concerns, right?
Absolutely. To both of them, yes. Exactly.
Yeah. It's not even probably just two concerns. There's probably there's a lot of different layers in that onion.
So true. So true.
Yeah. And I actually do hope, as I'm working with a strategy consultant, I am thinking that one of the things that's probably going to shift a little bit, or just recenter things for me, is that I'm hoping that my community, my anti-boring educators community, might grow to be a professional development community for people to help. Like, what would it be like to bring in more guest speakers, and or just to have more members of diverse identities, where we can share our stories and experiences with each other, and bring in guest speakers to speak to areas where we don't have that representation in our community yet, so that we can be growing our ability to be co-conspirators and allies with, a greater and greater array of identities. And one of the truths I think about kids these days is they are more and more identity savvy.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Right?
My brother is 23. And I remember thinking, oh, wow. Then I also have a cousin who's 18. And I look at her, I'm like, wow, you're going to change the world. Like, you got this. Like, things I had to Google and study, she can communicate with such confidence and clarity about. And then I look at my younger kids, they don't bat an eye when they talk about friends who have changed identities. I have, they've experienced it. And it gives me so much hope in our world because, our generation, you're probably a little younger than me, but my generation and up, they held on to identities in a way that my children's generation, they're just so much more open to discovering and appreciating differences.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm guessing we're more aligned age-wise than you think. I'm 47.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm 42. And
I
was the old lady in the crew.
It's the hair dye and the youthful bounce.
Yes. Maybe my kids just make me feel old. I'm just like,
Yeah, it could be. I don't have kids. I don't.
That's why you have the glow.
I'm a devoted auntie, and my kiddos give me life without draining my life.
I love it. Oh my gosh, auntie is one of my favorite titles.
Yes, I love it. I love it. And in fact, side note that I think is kind of cute, but also deep. I don't know if you've read the articles around, the characteristics of white supremacy culture. But, they have the lists of the different characteristics and then the antidotes to white supremacy culture. And I love that the word antidote is antidote.
Oh, yes.
Isn't that deep? And so it's what if that was like the way, like if we all could like take on our hearts to be like anti-love, antidoting love, and if we could embrace identities.
Yes. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. The other day where they were exploring that. And that is one of the conversations that I also have to be more comfortable having, because me as a Black woman, I'll tell you just my own identity, if I'm speaking about or to, issues because of systemic racism or white supremacy, those are uncomfortable for me to have those conversations in certain spaces. And so for me, even recognizing that in myself.
Yeah.
That's a piece of this too.
It's so a piece of this. Yeah.
It is, because I think about, okay, are they going to think I'm the angry Black woman, right? There's that. And do I think I'm that? No, but then I'm going into some of these conversations already assuming that that's how I'll be perceived, which is not the best way for me to approach it, but it's also something I need to be aware of.
Right. That let me see if I can actually share my screen for a brief moment to share something related. I don't know if I can. We're going to find out. And then we need to move into wrap up mode here. I have a question I want to ask to support us.
Sure.
But I have been engaged in a year-long coaching cohort for anti-racist educational leadership. And so one of the things my coach, and as a part of that, I paid for one-to-one coaching. And Joe, who actually, he will be my, I'll be chatting with him next week, and I'll even be asking him, what's it like to coach me?
Yes. Oh, I'm curious. I can't wait to tune into that.
Tune in next week. But what you're seeing here is I never used to have norms or invitations or practices at the top of our community calls. But he has been supporting me in figuring out what our norms might be as a community. And it's a very interesting question because our community rotates in and out. So how do you create community norms with people when you just never know who's going to show up each call? But it has been so interesting these are a work in progress. So nobody watching thinks this is the final thing. But what does it mean to like decenter dominant culture in our coaching? What does it mean to have a lens of decentering dominant culture, even in our training calls? Right now, I think we're just practicing noticing when there are opportunities, but it's a new level of intimacy to actually name it in community, and especially in a mixed community. So I'm interested to see what will happen as we grow our muscles together, our intimacy muscles for being able to speak more of our truths and to be held in uncomfortable truths together. So we'll just see how that works in our community. But then also the unlearning mastery, like what does it mean to try to not be perfect and to let ourselves be messy? And I'm playing with what I say here, but I kind of loved when I wrote this. Remember that feeling awkward, dumb, or unwoke signals you're probably on the edge of an aha.
I love that.
So
I love that. That's really powerful. I think I'm really impressed that you're doing that. I think that's amazing. And I think the biggest thing that I'm taking out of that is that there's a willingness of you as the leader of your community to reflect. I say this all the time, leaders reflect.
mm-hmm.
And if they don't, they're leading blind. And so I think that's a great first step. You said noticing. I need to do the same thing. Like, even if I'm looking at my coaching sessions, am I making assumptions? You know, I remember what it felt like. Well, I didn't necessarily have it, but I remember observing students who had experiences where you even just saying something like parents, and you're just assuming that everyone has parents, right, that are raising them. That's not the case.
Yeah.
And so, you know, in my own language, in my practice, I say parents and caregivers, but to some, parents is probably not the right word. I've been in schools where that is not the word that we use. And so how do I reflect on my practice? How do I reflect on my exercises that I use with clients and make sure that I'm doing my part too?
Yeah, and for me, it's so powerful, and not just powerful, but crucial. And actually, I know already my strategy consultant has told me that one of the things I will be talking about more publicly is my absolute adamant belief that to be the best educators for students, we must be educators who are actually practicing the tools we teach our students in our own lives regularly. And if we're not practicing, then that's contributing to not being a safe space. And so we must do it. And she asked me if I have any competitors. And I was like, I don't think I have any competitors, because I don't hear anyone talking about building a coaching community dedicated to practice and dedicated to reflective practice, not just around the emotional stuff, but around the socio-political level of talking about identities and having some harder conversations with each other about what's happening there.
I think that is so important, because, you know, I think about ultimately what it takes to reach students. You have to reach the people who are reaching the students. I think I said that earlier. And I've been drawn to, like, what does coaching look like for educators so that they can unpack their own biases, so they can unpack their own emotions, right? Because I'm really passionate also about emotional intelligence. That's something I've studied for a long time. And so when do you as the educator need to tune into what's happening in your own heart, your own feelings that are influencing your thoughts about a certain student, and then taking that time to reflect on it? Because education, like when we talk about coaching and education, it's not like coaching like you and I are talking about. And so I think there's a huge opportunity there to help people recognize, okay, what do I need to do within myself so that I am in fact helping and not hurting?
Right. Yes. So what's such big stuff?
Yes.
So I'm going to ask a question now while we're still recording, and then you can either decide if you want to answer it while we're recording or if you want to chat about it after we end the recording. But just so that everyone can hear, I'm like, so what's next? How are we going to work together? What are we going to do?
What are we going to do? We need to change the world. Change the world. I am working on something for educators that I'd love to share with you. That is my attempt to use what I know to schools, because that's where our students are.
Mm-hmm.
Organizations, that's where
Mm-hmm.
students are.
Mm-hmm.
Coaching practices like us. Anyone who touches kids, I think, who's impacting kids, who's working with kids, they have a responsibility to do this work internally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we always say, do the inner work, but how do you
Mm-hmm.
do that? How do you do that in a school setting? How do you do that in an academic coaching practice or a life coaching practice?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to be a part of that how.
Mm-hmm.
I
And
think
you have something very specific you're working on that you're either willing to share publicly or you want to share privately?
I'll share it privately. It's not so concrete and ready
Yeah.
that I'm ready to
Uh-huh.
speak about it
Awesome.
publicly, but it is a program for educators. It's a coaching
Great.
program that I don't know if it's going to fall under PD. I'm assuming that's maybe where I'll end up.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got the nuts and bolts. I'm happy to chat with you.
I can't wait to hear more about that.
Yes.
I love being public, and then I love being secret, but then I love being public about our secrets.
Yes. No, I've been talking about this passion of mine to bring coaching in schools,
Mm-hmm.
and in a way that can serve kids through their teachers.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm fleshing out.
Yeah. So, awesome.
Can't wait to share.
Yeah. So I want to ask you one more question, which I meant to save more time for, because as I do this interview series, I just love talking to adults about themselves as learners, because I think too often people who work with kids don't think about themselves as learners anymore. But like, who were you as a learner when you were in school, and how has that changed over time as you've learned through adulthood?
Of course. Can you repeat the question? It went out real quick.
Yeah. Who are you as a learner? Who were you as a learner, actually? And how has that changed as you've moved into learning as an adult?
Probably hasn't changed a whole lot. My kids kind of laugh at me. They're like, Mom, you love school. Like, I was looking at my grades and checking my GPA, and I was like, how did I get a B on this? I was so upset. As a learner, I wanted good grades. I didn't have to be like the valedictorian per se, but I wanted to be in the top of my class.
Mm-hmm.
I like to do well academically. I like to learn. Learning was a value that was instilled in my family. It was never, are you going to college the way I was raised? Mm-hmm. It was, which college are you going to? Mm-hmm. And so I've adopted that expectation for myself. I'm sure I'll go back to school again. Mm-hmm. So yeah, learning's always been very important to me, and I've always had this side of myself that wanted to excel academically. But I also, what has shifted is where that comes from. So when I was younger, and I think this is something I relate to with a lot of my clients, I was more of the people pleaser, and I wanted to do well because that was the expectation. Mm-hmm. Do all the things your parents expect, don't get in trouble. Like, that was me as a learner. Get good grades because that's what's expected. Mm-hmm. And so the shift now is I'm learning because I choose to learn, and I want to learn, and I'm motivated and excited to learn, not because I'm looking for, that love or that encouragement and support and praise. Yeah. Like I was younger when I did when I was younger.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I identify so much with that. And I think maybe the only shift that I might say about now, and this is actually through the lens of academic coaching, is I have learned how to use my desire for praise and affirmation from people to my advantage, and choose to come up with fun study strategies when I'm learning something, but then show them off. Like, I'll make a video about it. Or you train people about it. So.
Yes. Oh my gosh, why do I need to stop using flashcards? Something like that. I watched that video, might have been a year or so ago. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a teacher doing this all wrong at home.
What's an example? Say, because if people haven't seen that video, what was it that you remember learning from the video, and what were you doing wrong?
Just drilling like instead of playing a game like ping pong balls instead.
Okay, hold on. We're going to have you repeat that now because we had a blip.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to remember. At the time, we were doing vocabulary flashcards. And I remember watching the video and then like Googling games. And so I started playing a game with my youngest son, is who I was doing it with, where we were using like words on a ping pong ball.
Uh-huh.
And it was like shooting basketball for him.
Nice.
As opposed to just words with no context and definitions
Right.
on the back.
Right. Well, yay, good. Changing the world one creative study strategy at a time.
Yes, just to make him engage and take ownership and give the word meaning is really what I was gaining from that.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we end the streaming of this call, if people are curious about finding out more about you and our life coaching for teen girls, where can they find you?
Yes. So I'm on all the social platforms under my name, Tahira Bell. And my website is the same, www.tahirabell.com. On that site, there's a whole bunch of information about me and a place where you can book a call if you're a parent and looking to chat about your teenage daughter. So I offer free calls for parents. They're called parent coaching chats. You can find that link on the website. And I am also on Clubhouse at Tahira Bell. I have a club and Clubhouse called Raising Confident Teen Girls. So I'd love to meet you there on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. and just having conversations about all things teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I'm on Clubhouse too, and I'm needing to flex my Clubhouse muscles more. If you want to have me in and chat about study skills for teenage girls, let me know.
Absolutely, that would be amazing. Gosh, I needed you last week. Everyone was freaking out about finals.
Right? Well, next year.
Next year for sure, but we'll do something before then. But yes, you will be it for finals week.
Oh, that's so funny. All right. Well, and if anybody needs more information about me, I'm at GretchenWegner.com. Folks probably know that if they're watching the video. And I'm going to be rolling out more and more information about some of the switches and changes to my own program. And if folks are interested in joining a professional learning community where we have a whole lot of fun because it's anti-boring, but we also talk about some pretty deep stuff. I'm here for you, so people can reach out to me too. So Tahira, this has just been a total delight, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you as soon as we stop the recording too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Good. In the car on the way to graduation.
What can I say? This is real life. It is what it is.
It is. All right. Well, take care, everyone out there.